The air crackled with a manufactured joy, a celebratory dinner for Serena, my wife, who had finally ascended to the hallowed halls of Lockridge and Crane. This corporate law firm was her personal deity. She'd sacrificed to endless nights, forgotten vacations, and missed countless milestones for that gilded corner office. Tonight, beneath the glittering city lights, was her coronation, and she'd summoned her entire lineage to bask in her reflected glory. By the way, please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. The downtown steakhouse reeked of money and ambition, a place where the wine list eclipsed the menu, and every patron looked surgically plucked from a glossy magazine. Serena, naturally, had chosen the table by the vast window, the one overlooking her skyline, her dominion. She was already holding court when I arrived, a radiant beacon at the head of the table. Her father, Raymond, a former senator turned boardroom titan, was a picture of polished precision, his silver hair immaculate, his blazer impeccably sharp. Beside him, her mother, Francine, swirled her wine with a studied grace, as if deciphering the universe's secrets in its ruby depths. Her kindness was a performance, a flawless facade even when no one was watching. Then there was Camille, Serena's younger sister, a self-proclaimed free spirit, yoga instructor, and Instagram sensation, whose wardrobe seemed pilfered directly from a Coachella ad. Serena's smile when she raised her glass was incandescent. "I just made partner," she beamed, her voice ringing with triumph, "while my husband is just a plumber." Laughter erupted around the table, a chorus of polite amusement that twisted my gut. Even Camille, who'd never toiled a day in her life, emitted a high-pitched grating giggle. Serena didn't see me then. She saw the convenient fiction she'd constructed, the unassuming blue-collar husband who provided charming texture to her narrative. She loved to tell people I was a plumber, as if my supposed simplicity amplified her own meteoric rise. I forced a smile, brittle and fragile, clinking my glass against hers. I swallowed water, allowing the bitter sting of disappointment to seep into my very bones. Micah, the guy who fixes pipes, she'd coo at parties, her tone dripping with affectionate condescension. I'd always laughed it off, an easier path than exposing the uncomfortable truth. My work boots and the wrench in my trunk were no source of shame. I believed in the quiet dignity of honest labor, even if the world stubbornly refused to acknowledge it. A waiter appeared bearing a tray of appetizers. My hand drifted toward a shrimp skewer, but my appetite had vanished, consumed by the sight of Serena's eyes, alight in the candlelight, as she absorbed her father's admiration and her mother's honeyed praise. "You've always been the smart one," Francine declared, her smile drawn tight as a drum. "We knew you'd outgrow all this." She didn't spare me a glance as she spoke. I wondered if Serena had ever shared the truth of those nights I'd cooked when she was too weary to move, or the times I'd massaged her aching feet after grueling 12-hour days. No, that wasn't part of the carefully crafted story. Camille, meanwhile, was engrossed in her phone, showing Serena something that sparked another round of shared laughter. I longed to ask, but experience had taught me that sometimes it was best to let them dwell within their own self-made bubble. Then Francine's phone buzzed, shattering the illusion. Her eyes narrowed in irritation, suddenly widened in alarm. Color drained from her face. "Serena," she breathed, her voice a strangled whisper. "Why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal?" The room fell silent. The clinking of silverware ceased. Every eye, even Serena's, wide and unblinking, fixed on me. "What's she talking about?" Serena demanded, her tone sharp, as if I had committed an unforgivable transgression. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the moment to bloom. The truth, like a hidden weapon, had always been within reach, tucked away in the pocket of my work jeans. Francine thrust her phone across the table. The headline blared, bold and undeniable. "Ironclad Systems' estimated valuation hits $1 billion amid acquisition rumors." My name wasn't emblazoned there, but my company's name screamed its silent accusation. I met Serena's stunned gaze, her glass still suspended midair, her mouth slightly agape. "Micah," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "Is this true?" I nodded once. "Yeah, Ironclad is mine. A flicker of dawning realization crossed her face. The veiled timeline, the carefully guarded secrecy, the long hours I'd spent at the lab. She searched for words, but I spoke first. But I'm just a plumber, remember? Her glass clinked against the table, sat down with a force that echoed through the sudden electric silence. Camille's phone glowed, a half-written caption abandoned. Raymond's face had paled to the color of damp concrete, his mind surely racing through calculations of missed opportunities and profound regret. Francine's wine glass trembled in her hand. For the first time in years, the room saw me, the real me. Not the convenient fiction they'd authored, not the footnote to Serena's gleaming success. I was the architect of something real, built in the quiet shadows while they'd been consumed with polishing their own self-important images. I said nothing more. I simply picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, allowing the tension to coil tighter around the table. Serena's eyes probed mine, searching for a stranger, and in that raw moment I saw the first hairline cracks in her unshakable confidence. The dinner had been hers, the triumph hers. But the truth? The truth was unequivocally mine, and I had let it sit there, waiting for the precise moment to burst into blinding light. Perhaps it wasn't polite, perhaps it wasn't fair, but it was real. And I had learned long ago that reality, unvarnished and unapologetic, was infinitely better than any story. They had no inkling that I owned Ironclad Systems, a private B2B infrastructure company that had pioneered AI pipeline diagnostics for municipal and industrial applications. My name remained out of the public eye. I preferred it that way, leaving the press to my CTO. Everyone, even Serena, had simply assumed I was the guy who fixed pipes. She who once claimed to adore every facet of my being, my ambition, my intellect, my stubborn streak, had been utterly oblivious. Her world was built on the shaky foundations of status and titles, partner at Lockridge and Crane, her new gleaming identity. My world, however, was quieter. I reveled in the knowledge that my work commanded respect in ways that required no grand title or gilded plaque. Ironclad Systems had germinated from countless late nights at the local library, fueled by gas station coffee, while I pursued my master's in fluid engineering. The city's decrepit pipeline systems fascinated me. The sheer colossal waste born from leaks, burst mains, and obsolete detection methods. Municipalities bled money, constantly reacting to problems that had already wrought millions in damages. I envisioned a different path. I began to code, to sketch, to dream. I forged a prototype diagnostic tool, one that harnessed AI and predictive analytics to pinpoint weaknesses in pipe systems long before they escalated into emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it saved cities millions. By the time I secured my first tangible contract with a small forward-thinking water district in Pennsylvania, Serena was just beginning her demanding first year at Lockridge and Crane. She was perpetually exhausted, overwhelmed, so I spared her the intricate details of my burgeoning enterprise. I'd return home, dirt under my nails, a quiet grin on my face, only to find her buried beneath mountains of case files. I'd simply kiss her forehead and let her sleep. I pressed on, steadily expanding my team of engineers and coders. Our growth was organic, fueled by word of mouth and irrefutable results. Our technology predicted 83% of urban pipe failures before they occurred. The city of Philadelphia alone had saved an astounding $12 million 6 months, thanks to Ironclad. Yet at every family dinner, I remained the recipient of polite, thinly veiled jokes about fixing leaks and unclogging drains. Serena never corrected them. At first, it amused me. I'd sip my drink, offering a subtle smile and a nod. It was a form of social camouflage. No one ever bothered to ask the plumber for a donation, or to join a board, or to sponsor a gala. I could observe, a silent sentinel, unburdened by the endless charade of appearances, and I was genuinely curious. How would these people treat me when they believed I possessed no power, no influence? Spoiler alert, they failed the test. Her father, Raymond, loved to hold court, pontificating on the stock market, the political climate, and all the ways the world could be fixed if only everyone would listen to him. He'd glance at me with the same paternalistic nod he'd offer the hired help, a token acknowledgement of Serena's blue-collar husband, a testament to the American dream. He talked at me, never to me. Her mother, Francine, was more subtle. She'd inquire about my day in a tone that implied she already knew it was utterly uninteresting. Camille, bless her, was usually too absorbed in curating her next Instagram post to even notice my presence. Serena would gently pat my knee beneath the table, a silent apology that always felt more like a warning. Don't ruin the image, don't correct the story, don't step out of place. And so, I didn't. I allowed them to believe I was merely the plumber who had lucked into marrying up. Meanwhile, I was meeting with my CTO and CFO in discreet conference rooms, finalizing licensing deals with water authorities that deposited seven-figure sums into our accounts overnight. I was building a company that employed brilliant engineers, visionary coders, and dedicated field technicians, people who'd spent their lives believing their ideas held no weight. I gave them purpose and I gave them anonymity, because Ironclad didn't need a flashy founder to deliver results. I was content to let the technology speak for itself. But sometimes, driving home from the lab at 2 in the morning, a warm cup of gas station coffee clutched in the console, I'd think of Serena and how she'd simply stopped asking about my work altogether. In the early days, she'd been curious, asking questions about the technology, the overarching goals, the grand vision. But somewhere along the way, the answers ceased to align with her increasingly self-absorbed narrative. She became so consumed by her own ascent that she failed to grasp that I, too, was building something monumental, something far grander than a corner office or a gleaming brass nameplate. I didn't mind, not at first. I'd watch her speak of becoming partner as if it were the Holy Grail itself, and I'd smile, telling her she deserved it. Because she did. She worked relentlessly, sacrificed weekends, turned herself inside out for that firm. But I was working too, just in a different realm. And somewhere along the line, we dissolved into her and the plumber. She didn't know I'd already inked deals with major cities across the East Coast. She didn't know we'd been approached by Praxium Holdings for a potential acquisition that would rocket Ironclad's valuation into the billions. She didn't know that the man she affectionately, condescendingly called the guy who fixes pipes was on the precipice of becoming one of the most quietly powerful figures in the infrastructure sector. I never corrected her. Partly I wanted to witness who she would become when the allure of money wasn't a factor, and partly I wanted to experience the profound satisfaction of holding the truth in my pocket, a secret weapon, not to wound her, but to affirm that I hadn't needed her validation to reach this zenith. When the Wall Street Journal article finally landed, my CFO forwarded it with a laconic one-line email. Looks like the cat's out of the bag. I stared at the headline, Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar underground giant, and felt the crushing weight of every family dinner where I had played the docile part. I had allowed them all to believe I was small so they could feel grand. I had allowed Serena to build her narrative upon my supposed insignificance, brick by painstaking brick, and now every one of those bricks had become part of an empire they had never seen coming. The plumber, just a plumber. I smiled. When I first encountered Serena, I was in my final year of grad school, relentlessly pursuing a master's in fluid engineering while juggling a half-dozen odd jobs to simply keep the lights on. Plumbing work was one of them. Installing water heaters, unclogging drains, fixing the mundane things no one ever wanted to discuss at dinner parties. I wasn't ashamed of it. In truth, I enjoyed the problem-solving, the tangible satisfaction of mending something others deemed irreparably broken. It was honest labor, and it paid the bills while I furiously scribbled equations and built prototypes late into the night. Serena was a second-year associate at Lockridge and Crane then, with a smile that could shatter glass and an ambition that radiated from her like heat from asphalt. She'd frequent the cafe where I worked part-time, a stack of legal pads tucked beneath her arm, too immersed in case files to notice the coffee stains on my jeans. I admired that about her. Her unwavering focus, the way she could dissect a complex contract like an intricate puzzle she was determined to solve. She looked up from her laptop, eyebrows arched. "What are you reading?" she'd asked, pointing to the engineering textbook beside my half-eaten bagel. That was the genesis. She was drawn to my curiosity. I was captivated by her fiery drive. I believe she saw the genuine me, the one who spent sleepless nights designing fluid dynamics models, the one who yearned to make cities better, safer, smarter, and initially she did. We'd steal quick dinners between our shifts, sharing our dreams, our visions for the future. She'd praise my ambition, my drive. "You're going places," she'd say, tracing a finger along my jawline, her eyes ablaze with promise. "We'll be unstoppable together." But somewhere, imperceptibly, that narrative shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but it felt like a slow, agonizing fade, like watching a sunset in reverse. Perhaps it was the night she brought me to the Lockridge and Crane holiday party and introduced me as Micah. "He's a plumber." The way she uttered it, like a punchline, a sweet little anecdote to prove she wasn't shallow, that she could love someone who didn't wear a tie to work. I smiled, of course. I played along. I told myself it didn't matter because I knew the empire I was silently building behind the scenes. But every time she repeated that joke, at dinners, at parties, in casual conversation, a piece of me chipped away. I felt myself becoming the role she needed me to play. In the story she was tirelessly constructing for herself, Serena, the brilliant corporate lawyer, with a simple, dependable husband who was effortlessly manageable. "You're so simple, so dependable," she'd murmured one night, her head resting on my shoulder after a grueling day. She said it like a compliment, like a desirable trait. I laughed, but the words clung to me. Simple, dependable, like a Labrador retriever. As if I'd been housebroken, as if she'd selected me from a lineup of options because I would never stray too far from her shadow. I used to brush it off, convinced our bond was stronger than such trivialities, that she was merely tired or stressed, or that the relentless demands of her job had sharpened her tongue beyond her intent. But the joke ceased to be funny. It became the relentless soundtrack of our marriage. Serena, the overachiever. Micah, the plumber, easy to overlook. At first, I attempted to remind her of who I truly was. I'd casually mention a new project at work or drop subtle hints about the lucrative contracts I was negotiating. But her eyes would glaze over, darting back to her phone, to emails from partners, to urgent messages from clients. She was too consumed by winning, and I was too consumed by letting her. I could have pushed back. I could have corrected her. But a part of me, a dark, curious part, wanted to see how far she'd go. I wanted to know if she would ever look past the convenient image she'd crafted, the comfortable story she'd wrapped around me like a worn, familiar coat. I wanted to know if she would ever ask, "Micah, what are you really building?" But she never did. She preferred the version of me that magnified her own success by comparison. She preferred the narrative where she was the undisputed star and I merely the backdrop. Sometimes, watching her prepare for work in the morning, all crisp lines and perfectly coiffed hair, I'd wonder if she even remembered the man she'd met in that bustling cafe, the one with coffee-stained jeans and an undeniable spark in his eye, the man who yearned to change the world, one pipeline at a time. I never stopped working. While she posted office selfies, espresso cup in hand, adorned with captions like "Monday Motivation," I was in the lab with my team, meticulously refining AI models capable of predicting pipe failures down to the very street corner. While she presented to partners, I was negotiating with city councils and utility boards, securing deals that would fundamentally transform how cities manage their infrastructure. I was building something tangible, something that would endure long after 1,000 office promotions and 1,000,000 LinkedIn posts had faded into oblivion. But at the dinner table, at family gatherings, at the bar with her esteemed colleagues, I was simply the plumber. And she never corrected them. She never afforded me the benefit of the doubt. She never inquired about the silent smile, the weary eyes. She didn't see the countless hours I poured in after midnight, the sacrifices I made, the brilliant team I led. To her, I was simple, dependable, forgettable. It's ironic, isn't it, how the people who claim to love you can be so utterly blind? Or perhaps it's not blindness at all. Perhaps it's a deliberate ignorance, a calculated choice to maintain a neat, clean story, to preserve the comfortable hierarchy. Serena needed that, and I foolishly allowed her to have it, convinced it didn't matter, that she would remember who I truly was when it mattered most. Turns out I was gravely mistaken. While she posted office selfies, latte in hand, I quietly built Ironclad with a small devoted team of engineers and coders who believed in the vision long before the world began to pay attention. I started in a cramped single-room office with a shared bathroom and a flickering fluorescent light that cast a permanent crime scene pallor, but it was mine. And within those four walls, we forged something the world never saw coming. We were the underdogs, toiling through nights illuminated by vending machine glow and the low hum of servers, subsisting on too much bad coffee, taking immense pride in our strange, brilliant AI models. We refined our diagnostics algorithm tirelessly again and again until it surpassed every competitor. Our software could predict up to 83% of urban pipe failures before they even occurred. Imagine that. Cities saving millions on repairs and preventing catastrophic water loss. But no one at Serena's gilded dinner tables ever asked me about that. No one cared to hear about the countless hours I spent pitching our revolutionary technology to skeptical local water authorities, or the tense phone calls with engineers who would rather replace a pipe than listen to a guy in jeans pontificate about artificial intelligence. They only saw Serena's dazzling success, the partner's salary, the high heels that clicked with authoritative precision. And then they'd glance at me as if I were a charity project she'd plucked from a shelter. At those dinners, Serena's father would hold court, pontificating on the stock market, a real man's game, while her mother would sip her third glass of wine, prattling about their family's illustrious legacy and the arcane world of politics, as if it were an inheritance too sacred to share with someone who simply worked with his hands. Camille, meanwhile, would meticulously filter her selfies, captioning them, "Family time with the power couple," as if I were a trophy she'd borrowed for the evening. And each time Serena would smile and pat my knee under the table, as if that simple gesture was all it took to keep me placated. I began to see it, the insidious way she reveled in the contrast. She was the high-powered attorney, I was the plumber. It gave her an edge at those dinner parties, made her appear benevolent, the shining star who didn't need to marry her equal because she was simply that good. But every day, while she meticulously curated her brand and worked those punishing late hours, I was in meetings that could fundamentally reshape the face of a city's infrastructure. I held contracts with the Department of Water Management and several high-level government agencies. We were actively revolutionizing how cities managed their aging pipelines. In Philadelphia, our technology had saved the city $12 million in just 6 months. $12 million, so that was real money, real impact. And yet, at her parents' sprawling home, I was still just the guy who fixed drains. I remember one night vividly. Her father, leaning back in his chair, cigar in hand, looked at me and said, "So, Micah, when are you going to get serious about your career? Serena's carrying the weight, you know." Serena chuckled lightly, not even bothering to offer a defense. "Dad," she said, "Mike is fine. He likes what he does." She said it as if I were a child who had decided finger painting was a viable career choice. I felt the smile freeze on my face. That was the precise moment I realized that in their eyes, and perhaps even in Serena's, I wasn't building anything of consequence. I was merely a placeholder, a warm body at the dinner table. I played along because I wanted to see how long it would take before anyone noticed the gaping cracks in their meticulously constructed narrative. Spoiler alert, no one did. My team at Ironclad worked in relentless silence, refining and scaling. We achieved record-breaking numbers and began to garner awards with understated logos that would have impressed Serena's father had he ever bothered to inquire. But I didn't share the articles. I didn't bring them home. I didn't boast, because I was watching how everyone treated the man they believed me to be, the man who had married up, the man who should be eternally grateful to be at their table. It's peculiar, isn't it, how people claim to crave authenticity, yet they recoil when it shows up, uninvited and inconvenient. I think that's why I kept my success under wraps, not just from Serena, but from everyone. I wanted to see who truly loved me when there was nothing to gain. Spoiler alert, not many did. And every time I sat at that dinner table, a polite smile plastered on my face, nodding along to the endless chatter of stock options and lavish vacation homes, I wondered what would happen when the truth inevitably erupted. When the headlines splashed across their screens and the plumber was suddenly worth more than all their fancy law degrees combined. I wondered how they would react when the man they had routinely belittled turned out to be the one holding the winning hand. I wondered if Serena would still smile the same way when she finally grasped that the person she had married was not the carefully curated narrative she had sold to her friends. So I sat there listening to her father's tiresome lectures on politics, her mother's incessant bragging, Camille's shallow, pre-filtered jokes. I let them babble about my little jobs while I signed multi-million-dollar contracts and negotiated groundbreaking government deals. And in those moments, I learned more than I ever did in any engineering class. People will believe whatever story you feed them, especially if it makes them feel superior. It was the underestimation principle. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're small. Let them laugh. Because when the truth finally emerges, their surprise is the sweetest victory. So I sipped my water. I let them laugh. And I smiled because I knew with absolute certainty that the day was coming when the plumber would be the one they all desperately wanted to meet. Serena started referring to me as utility class in front of her colleagues. The first time she uttered it, I thought I'd misheard. We were at a rooftop cocktail event, one of those slick affairs where everyone sported tailored suits and barely sipped their expensive martinis. The city skyline stretched behind us, a dazzling tapestry of glass and steel. My mind, however, was miles away, contemplating the latest contract Ironclad had secured with the city of Boston, another multi-million-dollar deal that would propel our pipeline diagnostic technology nationwide. I'd planned to share that monumental news with Serena that very night, perhaps let her see just how far her plumber had truly come. But then she introduced me to her colleague, Henry, as utility class, and she didn't even blink. "He's the utility class," she'd said with a quick, dismissive laugh. "Keeps things running." Henry smirked, and I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I swallowed it down and shook his hand. Utility class. As if I were a second-tier citizen in her glittering world of polished boardrooms and manicured office plants, she'd said it lightly as if it were a compliment, as if I were an indispensable part of the system that allowed her high-powered life to function seamlessly. But I understood the insidious subtext. I'd seen it enough times in her eyes when she scrolled through Instagram, liking photos of the real winners, while pointedly ignoring my team's latest industry award. I'd felt it at family dinners when her father bragged about her triumphs and conveniently forgot I was even in the room. The utility class. Someone there to support, never to lead. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a joke, but the barbs began to accumulate. She'd text me things like, "Can you swing by the dry cleaner on your way home, utility class hero?" As if I were her personal assistant, as if I didn't have my own empire to run. The final indignity came when she deliberately excluded me from the invitation to her firm's exclusive retreat in Aspen. We'd planned to spend that weekend together, a rare opportunity to reconnect. I'd already rearranged meetings, rescheduled conference calls, and informed my CTO I'd be offline. But 3 days before the trip, she looked at me across the dinner table and said, "I don't think you'll really fit in there, Micah. It's just lawyers, the white shoe crowd. You'd be bored." She said it with that same glossy smile, the one that signaled the decision had already been made, and she was merely granting me the courtesy of a heads up. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever been bored at my investor dinners, or the time she'd sat through my keynote address at the water management conference, feigning interest. But the words died in my throat. I simply nodded and said, "Sure, enjoy yourself." Because I had learned the hard way that in her world, I was merely background, an accessory, a neat addition to her narrative about balancing success and humility, the husband who didn't mind being underestimated. I returned to my work, to Ironclad, where my team and I were finalizing a breakthrough update that would revolutionize urban pipeline monitoring. We landed a contract with the Department of Water Management, a federal pilot program that would integrate our software into over 100 cities. It was the kind of deal that would generate headlines, the kind that would firmly establish Ironclad as an undisputed industry leader. But at home, I was still the guy who held Serena's coat at cocktail parties, the man she'd conveniently omit from the guest list when things became truly exclusive. One night, she returned home late, her hair tousled from the wind, her eyes bright with a frenetic energy. "The retreat was amazing," she exclaimed, dropping her purse on the counter. "I wish you'd been there." I wanted to demand why she hadn't fought for me to come, why she'd allowed me to be the one left out while she networked and charmed, but I didn't. I simply smiled and asked how it went, and she launched into a detailed account of the partners' dinner, how everyone had roared at her jokes and praised her presentation. I stood there nodding, my mind drifting to the monumental deals I'd signed while she'd been gone, contemplating how no one at that dinner had the faintest idea who I truly was. Perhaps that's what finally broke me, the crushing realization that she no longer saw me, no longer wanted to see me, that she had constructed a version of me she could carry around like a good luck charm, safe, predictable, and utterly insignificant, that she had begun to believe her own carefully orchestrated public relations. That night, after she'd finally drifted off to sleep, I pulled up the email from my CFO. The Wall Street Journal was releasing a piece on Ironclad's latest valuation, a staggering $1 billion, with acquisition rumors swirling like a tempest. I felt no swell of pride, no surge of triumph, only a profound weariness, tired of being utility class, tired of being background, tired of waiting for someone else to finally recognize what I had built. I could have told Serena then, could have shown her the article, could have forced her to truly look at me for the first time in months, but I didn't. I wanted to see what would happen if I remained silent just a little longer, if she would notice. Spoiler alert, she didn't. The next morning, she kissed me lightly on the cheek and grabbed her briefcase. "Have a good day, Micah," she said, her voice bright and oblivious. "Don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning." I watched her walk out the door, her heels clicking like gunshots echoing down the hallway. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the email again. $1 billion valuation. My name in the fine print. The plumber she'd left off the guest list. I smiled to myself, a slow, knowing smile. They'll all find out soon enough, I thought. And when they do, I'll be the one holding the invitation they all desperately wanted. I had no grand scheme for revenge. I had no plan at all. I was simply tired. Tired of the dismissive looks, the patronizing laughter that reverberated in my ears every time Serena's colleagues or her family dismissed me as the plumber. It was easier that way, I told myself. Less confrontation, less drama. Let them think they had me neatly categorized. Let them continue building their house of illusions. Yet a gnawing certainty festered within me, a silent anticipation for the moment when truth would shatter pretense like a hammer through fragile glass. That seismic shift arrived on a Thursday morning, ushered in by an email from my CFO marked with the ominous high priority flag. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal, it seemed, had plunged into the depths of Ironclad's latest pact with Praxium Holdings. The reporter's relentless pursuit had unearthed our pipeline diagnostic track record. The staggering 83% reduction in catastrophic failures, the $12 million salvaged in Philadelphia, the federal contracts poised for approval. She had meticulously woven together valuation figures from investor calls, cross-referencing them with public records, culminating in a sum that seized my gut in a vice-like grip. Whispers of a potential acquisition, Ironclad Systems, valued at over $1 billion. It was all laid bare in stark black and white, with enough damning detail to ignite every boardroom across the city. I slumped back in my chair, allowing the monumental weight of it to settle. For years I had forged this company in the shadows, parrying questions, letting Serena's world believe I was merely another working man, a wrench-wielding everyman in a beat-up van. Now the blinding floodlights were about to descend, and I was utterly unprepared for how that revelation made me feel. There was no panic, no triumphant gloating. I didn't even breathe a word to my team. There would be time for that later. Instead, I did the one thing I hadn't done in months. I RSVP'd yes to Serena's family dinner on Saturday night. She had meticulously orchestrated it weeks ago, a celebration of her latest promotion. Her mother, no doubt, had already procured enough wine to submerge a small village, and her father would have a toast primed, dripping with the kind of self-congratulatory pride that invariably omitted any mention of me. Camille would be there too, undoubtedly armed with a fresh arsenal of Instagram filters, poised to meticulously document every step of Serena's ascent. What would they all say, I wondered, when the Wall Street Journal landed on their breakfast table that fateful morning? Would pride swell their chests, or shame, or the bitter sting of embarrassment that they had remained so utterly oblivious? Friday dawned, and with it the article plummeted. Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar plumber. I had to concede the journalist had struck gold with that hook. It was catchy, effortlessly shareable. A plumber transformed into a tech titan who had quietly forged an empire while the world looked elsewhere. I could already envision the headline spiraling across LinkedIn, the hushed whispers rippling through Serena's office. I had spent so long concealed in plain sight that seeing my name in print felt almost surreal. Michael Landry, founder and CEO. I considered calling Serena, issuing a warning, but then the memories washed over me. Every instance she'd casually dismissed me as utility class. Every guest list I'd been conspicuously absent from. The retreat in Aspen, the glittering cocktail parties, the polite condescending laughter, the tiny insidious cuts that had accumulated into a mountain of resentment. I decided she would read it just as everyone else would. Saturday night arrived, and I dressed as I always did. No suit, no tie, just jeans and a button-down shirt. The same Micah I had always been, the one they had so readily dismissed. I wanted them to truly see him when the truth erupted. I wanted them to realize that the man they had so profoundly underestimated was the very same one who had built something infinitely larger than all their dinners and promotions combined. The house, when I entered, was thick with the scent of garlic and wine. Serena's mother, a whirlwind of commands, was orchestrating the caterers in the kitchen. Her father, already enthroned at the head of the table, a glass of scotch clutched in hand. His voice reverberated through the room with the practiced authority of a seasoned politician. Camille was reclined on the couch, phone in hand, eyes riveted to the screen. Serena greeted me with a swift, practiced kiss on the cheek. "Hey, Han, thanks for coming." Her eyes sparkled, her smile flawless. She had no earthly idea. Dinner commenced as it always did. Her father launched into a lengthy encomium about Serena's achievements, their boundless pride in their daughter, now a partner at Lockridge and Crane. Camille snapped photos. Francine delicately dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. The room hummed with laughter and the clinking of glasses, the symphony of a family celebrating its star. Then Serena rose, glass in hand. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am for all of you," she began, her voice steady, the lawyer in her polished to perfection. "It's been a long road, but I couldn't have done it without my family. And Micah," she paused, bestowing upon me that sweet, rehearsed smile, "you've always been my rock." The room erupted in applause. I forced a smile. That's when Francine's phone erupted, vibrating with a ferocity that startled the table. She picked it up, her gaze scanning the screen. Her smile faltered. "Serena," she stammered, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "Why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal?" The room fell into an immediate, deafening silence. Even the caterer froze, every eye now fixed on me. Serena's face was a mask of disbelief. "Micah," she whispered, her voice cracking, "is that true?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, Ironclad is mine." Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. I looked at her father. His glass hung suspended in midair, forgotten. Camille's phone was now aimed directly at me, recording. I wondered what insipid caption she'd concocted this time. I rose, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. "But I'm just a plumber," I said, allowing the words to sink in, to permeate the stunned silence. No one laughed. No one moved. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as the guy with the wrench, not as Serena's husband, but as the man who had built something from nothing, the man they had so utterly underestimated. And in that profound silence, I realized I didn't need revenge. The truth, in all its devastating glory, was enough. The dining room now felt like a stage, every eye upon me, every breath held, as if the very world had halted its spinning just to witness my stand. Serena's father was the first to stir, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered his glass. "Micah, is this some kind of joke?" he demanded, his voice brittle, as if desperately trying to convince himself that I couldn't possibly have transcended his neatly drawn boundaries. I held his gaze, feeling years of quiet patience solidify into something unbreakable. "No joke," I stated, my voice unwavering. "Ironclad is mine. I built it. The contracts, the technology, the valuation, they're all real." Serena's lips moved, a silent struggle to articulate, but nothing escaped. Her eyes darted between me and the phone clutched in Francine's hand, the one displaying the Wall Street Journal article that had so utterly shattered the flimsy narrative she'd spun about me. How many times, I wondered, had she rehearsed that tale at cocktail parties, at office gatherings? Micah, the plumber, the simple, dependable husband who never sought too much attention. Did she comprehend just how fragile that story truly was? I could feel the room shifting, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface, the very foundations of their assumptions beginning to fracture. Camille's phone remained aimed at me, her thumb hovering, seemingly unable to decide whether to continue recording or simply put the damn thing down. I met her gaze and gave a single deliberate nod. Let her record. Let the world witness what they had so spectacularly overlooked. Serena's father leaned forward, his politician's smile utterly vanished, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his tone a perplexing blend of disbelief and accusation. I shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered to you," I replied. "Every time I sat at this table, it was about Serena, about her achievements, her promotions. No one asked what I was building. No one cared." His mouth opened, then closed. Francine set her wineglass down with a soft, resonant clink that sounded like a confession. "We didn't know," she whispered, her voice small, almost childlike. "That's the point," I stated, letting the words hang in the air, sharp and unyielding. "You didn't want to know. You preferred the version of me that neatly fit your story, the plumber, the guy who didn't make waves." Serena's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had blanched. "Micah," she began, her voice trembling, "why didn't you tell me? We're a team. We're supposed to share these things." I almost laughed, but it emerged as a tired sigh. "A team?" I repeated, my tone gentle yet edged with the brutal truth. "Like when you left me off the Aspen retreat? Like when you casually referred to me as utility class to your colleagues?" Her face paled, her mouth quivering. "Micah, But I cut her off. "Serena, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a supporting character in the grand narrative of your success. And I gave you that. I allowed you to have your story because I wanted to see who you truly were when you believed I had nothing to offer." The room was utterly silent. Camille's phone was trembling now. I wondered if she was finally seeing her sister for who she truly was. Serena's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. And the saddest part was, I believed her. She hadn't known because she hadn't wanted to. Her father cleared his throat. "Well, Micah," he began, forcing a smile that seemed to cause him physical pain. "Now that we know the truth, perhaps we can work together. There are plenty of opportunities. Political partnerships, business deals." I shook my head. "That's not why I'm here," I stated. "I didn't come to make a deal. I came because I was tired of pretending." Francine reached across the table, her manicured hand trembling as she attempted to bridge the chasm between us. "We always believed in you, Micah," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your family." Family! The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I looked at Serena, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "Micah, please," she pleaded, her voice a fragile whisper. Don't do this here. We can talk about it later. But I was done with later. I rose, pushing my chair back, its legs scraping against the hardwood like a discordant final note. No, I said. We're talking about it now. Because for years, I let you define who I was to everyone you cared about. I let you use me as a prop in your story. I let you laugh at me and I stayed silent because I wanted to believe that the woman I loved would see past the surface. But you didn't. Her sobs were quiet now, the kind that shake your entire being. I wondered if she cried for me or for herself. I turned to the rest of the table, to Francine and Raymond and Camille. You all got the version of me you deserved, I said, my voice slow but unwavering. But the truth was always there, if you'd bothered to look. I cast one last gaze at Serena, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd unwittingly taught me just how small people could be. I'm leaving now, I stated. Enjoy your dinner. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the applause that never came, the congratulations that never reached my ears. I felt lighter than I had in years because, finally, irrevocably, they knew. And I didn't need to be their plumber anymore. Questions erupted from every corner of the room. Raymond's voice boomed with disbelief as he demanded, You built that? How? Why didn't you say anything? Francine's eyes were wide, darting between her husband and me as if I'd grown two heads and was about to sprout a third. Camille had stopped recording, her phone now resting in her trembling hands, her Instagram feed momentarily forgotten. And Serena simply sat there, frozen, as if trying to piece together a shattered world. I stood by the dining room door, my hands resting on the back of the chair I'd abandoned moments earlier. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. I built it. Ironclad started as an idea scribbled on a napkin in a diner during my last year of grad school. I saw a problem no one was fixing: aging water infrastructure, billions of gallons of water lost every year, and I decided to do something about it. Raymond's jaw clenched, his politician's mask slipping. But you're a... He caught himself, but the word he'd almost used hung unspoken between us. A plumber, I finished, my voice steady. A plumber, I repeated, letting the words settle like dust in the silence. Yeah, I did plumbing work. I still do sometimes. I like the honesty in it, fixing things that are broken. But Ironclad, that's more than pipes. It's predictive analytics, AI technology that can save cities millions and prevent disasters. It's engineers, coders, field experts. It's the future, and it's mine. Serena's lips parted, but her voice emerged as a whisper. Micah, why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? I met her eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me as if I were the answer to every question she'd never asked. Because I wanted to know who loved me for me, I said. Not for a billion-dollar company, not for headlines, just for who I was when I walked through the door at the end of a long day. I swallowed, feeling the ache that had been building for years. Spoiler alert, you all failed the test. Her face crumpled, tears welling, but I didn't let myself waver. I turned to Raymond, who was still sputtering, attempting to reconcile the man he'd dismissed with the man who now owned a company larger than any of his political ventures. You never asked me what I did, I said, my tone flat. You asked how my day was, like you already knew the answer was unimportant. His mouth opened, but no words came. I turned to Francine. You treated me like a curiosity, a hobby, a story to tell at brunch with your friends. But you never asked why I kept going back to the lab after midnight, why I spent weekends in meetings instead of on the golf course. Francine's hand shook, the wine glass trembling as if the truth might spill over the rim. Micah, we didn't know, she whispered, her voice small. We thought you thought I was simple, I said, my voice sharpening. You thought I was the sidekick to Serena's story. But that's the thing about stories. They don't always go the way you expect. I felt the weight of the years pressing against my ribs, the dinners I'd endured in silence, the jokes I'd laughed at to keep the peace, and I let it all go. Serena's voice cracked. Micah, please, you didn't mean to see me, I interjected, cutting her off. You were too busy curating your life to realize there was more to me than the plumber who held your coat. I let the words hang, sharp and final, and that's on you. Raymond cleared his throat, his voice trembling with forced authority. Well, Micah, now that you've revealed yourself, perhaps we can discuss opportunities. There's a lot of potential here. I barked a laugh, cold and humorless. Opportunities? You think I need you? I shook my head. I built this without your approval, without your connections, without your money. I did it because I believed in the work, and I'm not interested in trading that in for a seat at your table. I've got my own table now. Camille, who had been silent through it all, finally spoke. So you really built all that? Her voice was small, as if she were asking if the moon was real. I nodded once, and she looked down at her phone, her face pale. Perhaps she was realizing that likes and followers didn't mean much when real work was staring her in the face. I took a breath, feeling the room's oppressive weight. Look, I said, my tone softening, though not enough to absolve them. I didn't come here to rub your faces in it. I came because I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being the man you thought I was instead of the man I am. I looked at Serena. Her face was streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped. I wanted to know who loved me before the billion, and I got my answer tonight. Her mouth opened, a sob caught in her throat. Micah, I shook my head. I can't be who you need me to be anymore. I can't be small so you can be big. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, the weight I'd carried for too long finally lifting. I hope someday you understand that. The room was silent. Even the caterer who had been hovering near the kitchen door had vanished. It was just us, and the truth, and the cold realization that nothing would ever be the same. I stood a little taller, my spine straight, my heart steady. Ironclad was mine, and so was my future. I turned and walked toward the door, the echoes of my footsteps, a rhythm of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward something real. As I reached the hallway, I heard Serena's voice, small and broken. Micah, please. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned just enough to meet her gaze. You always wanted the man who would stand behind you, I said. Turns out I was always the man who would stand on his own. And then I walked out, leaving behind the questions they'd never thought to ask, the assumptions they'd never bothered to challenge. I didn't need their validation. I had my own, and that was more than enough. Serena attempted damage control before I'd even left the driveway. My phone buzzed with her name 3 times in a row, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She'd already said enough with every polite laugh at my expense, every invitation she'd left me off, every time she'd called me utility class and expected me to smile. Now she wanted to talk. Now she wanted to work through it. I could imagine her scrambling, crafting the perfect apology, her mind spinning a web of justifications and rationalizations, but I was done. The next morning, I woke to an email from her. Subject line, "We need to talk." I opened it, half expecting a full-on apology, but it was a carefully worded plea. Micah, I'm sorry for the way things played out last night. I was blindsided and I didn't handle it well. I just wish you told me about Ironclad. We could have leveraged your success, used it to build our future together. Let's sit down and talk this through. We're a team. Love, Serena. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Leverage. That was the word that stuck in my throat. She saw my company, my blood and sweat, as a chess piece on her board, a tool for her image, for her brand. I thought of all the times I'd come home late from meetings, exhausted but wired with adrenaline from closing a deal, and she'd barely looked up from her phone. The times she'd called me utility class in front of her colleagues and never once corrected herself. That wasn't a team. That was a transaction. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened the envelope I'd been carrying around for weeks, a separation agreement I'd drawn up after the Aspen retreat, after I'd realized she saw me as an accessory instead of a partner. I'd never planned to use it. I'd kept hoping she'd see me, truly see me, but she hadn't. That afternoon, I walked into the living room and she was waiting, still in her tailored work dress as if about to deliver a closing argument. "Micah," she began, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion, "we've been through so much together. Don't let this ruin us." I sat down, my heart steady. "Serena," I said quietly, "I love the woman I thought you were. I love the nights you stayed up late studying for the bar, the way you'd light up when you talked about your first big case. But somewhere along the way, you stopped asking about me. You stopped caring about the man behind the work boots." Her lip quivered. "That's not fair." "It's perfectly fair," I cut in, my tone calm but unwavering. "Every time you called me just a plumber, every time you left me off the guest list, every time you told your colleagues I was utility class, you told me exactly who you thought I was." She blinked, tears welling in her eyes. "I was under pressure. My job—" "Your job didn't force you to look down on me," I said. "That was your choice." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "This is a separation agreement. I signed it already. You can review it with your fancy lawyer friends." Her face crumpled and she reached for my hand. "Micah, please don't do this. We can fix it. We can be a team." I pulled my hand away gently. "No," I said. "You never wanted a team. You wanted a story. You wanted the narrative of the successful partner with the simple, dependable husband. That's not me anymore." Her tears came fast now, rolling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," I said, standing up. "You meant every word, every laugh, every time you left me in the background." I looked down at her, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I was done proving anything to her. She tried again, her voice breaking. "Please, Micah, don't throw this away." I shook my head. "You threw it away every time you chose your image over your husband." I turned and walked toward the door, but paused, looking back at her one last time. "You'll be fine, Serena. You've always known how to land on your feet, but I need to be somewhere I can breathe." She sobbed, but I didn't turn back. I walked out the door, closing it behind me like the final page of a chapter I'd let drag on too long. Outside, the sun was just setting, painting the sky in colors that felt like freedom. I took a deep breath, the weight of years falling away from my shoulders. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like the man I'd always wanted to be, unapologetic, whole. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know it was her. I silenced it and kept walking because some things, once broken, can't be put back together, and I was done letting her hold the pieces. 6 months later, Ironclad Systems was in a completely different league. No longer the quiet giant in the background, but a powerhouse that dominated the conversation in the infrastructure tech sector. We'd finalized the strategic merger with Praxium Holdings, bringing in a valuation north of $1.4 billion, so it wasn't about the money, though. It was about the control, the creative freedom, the power to take the technology we developed and make it the gold standard for cities that had been struggling to modernize for decades. I still kept my original office in that same unremarkable building, with its chipped paint and the solitary humming vending machine that made the place feel like home. I'd tried the high-rise thing once, but the glass walls and corner offices just felt like a stage, something that would have made Serena's parents proud but left me cold. That morning, I sat in my office alone, watching the sun break over the skyline like a promise. My team was working out of our new expansion site on the other side of town, a state-of-the-art complex with all the bells and whistles. But I liked the quiet here, the way the walls still held the echoes of our first big wins, our late-night brainstorming sessions. My old work boots were propped under the desk, next to the same metal toolbox I'd carried for years. Some habits die hard. People called me a tech visionary now. Investors craved my time, my insight, my approval. Every time I walked into a conference room, I saw the recognition in their eyes, the hush that settled over the room before I spoke. I hadn't changed. I still wore the same kind of jeans, still kept a wrench in the trunk of my car just in case. Because deep down, I was still that guy who'd started this journey by fixing leaky pipes in basements that smelled of mold and old regrets. I'd never be too important to roll up my sleeves and do the work. I'd learned a lot in those 6 months about success, loyalty, and the fragile egos of people who only stand beside you when it suits them. Serena had tried everything. She'd called, texted, emailed. She'd even shown up at my office once, all apologies and tears, her voice trembling as she insisted that she hadn't meant to belittle me, that she'd just gotten caught up in her own ambition. She'd said we could be a team again, that my success was her success. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, just sorry that it had all blown up in her face. Sorry that her meticulously crafted narrative had fallen apart in front of everyone she cared about. I'd listened. I'd let her speak. And then I told her the same thing I told myself the night I walked out of her parents' dining room. I couldn't be small so she could feel big. She hadn't loved the man I was. She loved the version she built for her own story, the one that made her look magnanimous and unstoppable. I didn't hate her for it. I just couldn't go back to being that man. Sometimes I still saw her on social media, glass of wine in hand, captioning her life with carefully chosen words, smiling like the world hadn't shifted under her feet. I wondered if she'd found a new character to fill the role I played. I hope she did, because the truth was I didn't wish her ill. I just wished her gone from the parts of me she tried to shape. Ironclad's new partnership had opened doors I'd only dreamed of. We were now in 17 cities, with more on the horizon. Our AI systems were revolutionizing water management, cutting costs, preventing disasters, and giving mayors and city planners data they'd never thought possible. Every time we signed a new contract, every time another city manager called to thank me, I felt that same spark I'd felt the first time I'd sketched out the idea on a napkin. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a new deployment plan for Chicago, my CTO, Ravi, knocked lightly and poked his head in. "Hey, boss," he said, his grin wide. "You're going to want to see this." He handed me his tablet, and there on the screen was a glossy feature in Business Insider: the plumber who built an empire. I laughed under my breath. The headline felt like an echo of that night at Serena's parents' house, when I'd stood there while the room went silent. "Look at this," Ravi said, excitement buzzing in his voice. "They're calling you the man who changed the way cities manage water forever." I read the article, nodding. It was flattering, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the final quote. Some journalist had dug up one of my old interviews where I'd said, "I'll never stop being a plumber at heart. I'll never stop getting my hands dirty." And I wouldn't, because that was who I was. The guy who fixed things. The guy who saw a problem and refused to look away. Ravi looked at me, his grin fading a little as he caught the expression on my face. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." And I was. That evening I packed up my bag and headed out. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with pink and gold. I took the long way home, driving through the neighborhoods where I'd once done small plumbing jobs. The streets that had taught me how to navigate more than just pipes, how to navigate people, how to see past the surface. At a red light, I glanced at my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of my reflection. A man in his late 30s, a little older, a little wiser, a lot stronger than the guy who'd stood beside Serena while she called him utility class. I didn't need anyone to tell me my worth anymore. I'd written that story myself, and it didn't need anyone else's approval. When I got home, I kicked off my boots and set my toolbox by the door. Some habits, like I said, die hard. I walked into the kitchen, made a simple dinner, and sat down with a beer in my hand. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, that felt good. Later that night, I took a walk outside. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like shattered glass. I thought about the road I'd traveled, the moments when I'd felt small, the nights I'd wondered if I was enough. I thought about Serena, about the way she'd tried to mold me into something that fit her narrative, and about the way I'd finally broken free. People called me a tech visionary now, a disruptor, a game changer, but in my bones I was still the same guy with a wrench in his hand, still the same man who believed in fixing things. I just learned that sometimes the thing that needs fixing most is the way people see you and the way you see yourself. I smiled to myself as I turned back toward the house. Just a plumber, I thought. The man who built an empire while everyone else was looking the other way. And that was enough. Because I didn't need Serena's approval. I didn't need her father's praise or her mother's polite smile. I had my own success, built with my own hands, on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I didn't know what the future would hold. More cities, more contracts, more headlines maybe. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd face it on my own terms, with my boots on and my head held high. Because that's who I'd always been. Just a plumber. The man who never stopped fixing things. Ladies and gentlemen, since you've listened to the end of this story, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which state you're watching from. Let's see what percentage of elite viewers make it to the end. And please kindly turn your attention to the screen after this message. There you'll find a full playlist of thrilling stories, a subscribe button for the channel, and our most captivating story. Click, enjoy, and thank you.